Take it off. Carter's voice was pitched low, carrying an unyielding cold hardness. Inside the main ballroom of a charity gala in New York, the glow of crystal chandeliers refracted off the champagne glasses of the elite guests. Stella stood to the side of the auction stage. Her left wrist was clamped in Carter's iron grip. She did not move. Carter's brows were deeply furrowed, his gaze looking past Stella to land on Chloe, who sat in a wheelchair just outside the VIP section. Chloe wore a thin white dress, her face as pale as paper. She was covering her mouth, coughing softly, her eyes brimming with precarious tears. "Carter, let it go." Chloe's voice was as light as a breeze that could scatter it. "I just thought the antique cushion, cut diamond ring on Stella's hand looked so much like the one my grandmother left me, the one I accidentally lost. I wanted to win it at the auction as a keepsake. Since Stella isn't willing to part with it for tonight's charity auction, just forget it. I only have a few months left to live. I shouldn't be fighting over these things." Carter's jawline tightened fiercely. The pressure on Stella's wrist suddenly increased. The bones in Stella's hand let out a faint grinding sound under the strain. She swallowed hard, lifting her eyes to look at the man she had been married to for 3 years. "No," Stella said. Her voice was very light yet incredibly steady. "Do you have any sympathy at all?" Carter's eyes grew cold, looking at her like she was an unreasonable stranger. "It is just a broken 5-carat rock. I will buy you 10 better ones tomorrow. Chloe has already reached this stage and you insist on humiliating her in front of everyone tonight. This is not the one you bought." Stella's gaze fell on her ring finger. "This belonged to my grandmother." "Enough." Carter cut her off mercilessly, not listening to the second half of her sentence. His right hand directly grabbed the ring finger of Stella's left hand. Because of early pregnancy swelling, the ring was stuck tight. Without any hesitation, Carter violently yanked it outward. A sharp hiss. The metal band brutally scraped over the skin of her knuckle, tearing off a layer of flesh. A piercing pain shot up her nerves instantly. That antique diamond ring, carrying Stella's body heat and streaks of blood, was forcibly stripped away by Carter. He did not even glance at it, casually tossing the ring onto the nearby silver charity auction tray. With a crisp clink, the ring bounced off the edge of the silver tray, rolled along the red carpet, and kept rolling straight out the heavy double doors of the main ballroom. The surrounding guests gasped, whispers surged like a tide. Stella looked at her empty ring finger. Blood was seeping out from the joint, drop by drop, landing on the hem of her expensive couture gown. Her fingers began to tremble uncontrollably. "Are you crazy?" Stella asked softly. Carter turned around, staring down at her with a condescending gaze full of warning and impatience. "Am I crazy or are you crazy? Stella, when did you become so vain and vicious just to hog the spotlight? You would even destroy a dying person's last little keepsake." Meeting his gaze, Stella's stomach suddenly turned violently. A strong physiological nausea rushed up her throat. The color drained from her face in an instant, and she subconsciously took a half-step back, wanting to break free from Carter's oppressive presence. Carter thought she was going to walk over, pick up the ring, and continue making a scene. A flash of utter ruthlessness crossed his eyes. He raised his hand. A crisp, loud, merciless slap landed squarely on the right side of Stella's face. The entire ballroom went dead silent. Every conversation, every note of music was completely choked off by that slap. Stella's head was knocked to the side. A sharp, high-pitched ringing exploded in her ears. A red, swollen handprint quickly surfaced on her left cheek. She tasted the rusty metallic tang of blood in her mouth. For a second, her brain turned into a blank sheet of static. "Mrs. Sterling, if you cannot learn the most basic decency, you do not deserve to stand here." Carter adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit, his voice as cold as ice. "Apologize to Chloe right now, and then get the hell home and reflect on your behavior." Thousands of eyes were pinned on Stella. There was mockery, pity, and the gleam of people watching a good show. The head of Sterling Enterprises, for the sake of his sick first love, had publicly slapped his legitimate wife. Stella slowly turned her head back. She pushed her tongue against the broken inside of her cheek. She did not cover her face, nor did she shed a tear. She just looked quietly into Carter's eyes, meeting those calm, dead eyes without a single ripple of emotion. Carter's heart inexplicably skipped a beat. His fingers curled slightly at his side. "Okay," Stella said, "just one word." She did not walk toward Chloe, nor did she cast another glance at Carter. She turned around. Her high heels stepped on the thick wool carpet as she walked out the doors of the main ballroom. Step by step, the air in the corridor was much colder than inside. Stella stopped by the dark red baseboard near the entrance. That antique diamond ring lay there quietly. She bent down, picked it up, and gripped it in her palm. Outside the Plaza Hotel, rain was pouring down. The bellhop held an umbrella, wanting to step forward to greet her. Stella ignored him. She walked into the rain, stopping by the metal grate of a storm drain on the street corner. She opened her hand. Plop. That antique diamond ring left to her by her grandmother, which she treasured dearly, which Carter had publicly flung away, dropped into the foul-smelling sewer pipe without even a splash. After doing this, Stella leaned against a streetlight pole. A violent cramp seized her stomach. She crouched in the torrential rain and began to vomit violently. She had eaten nothing all evening, bringing up only sour, bitter water. The rain smashed against her back, chilling her to the bone. When she finished, she gasped heavily for air, clutching her lower abdomen with both hands. A heavy, dragging pain radiated from deep within. Something warm was flowing down the inside of her thighs. Under the dim yellow glow of the street lamp, Stella looked down and saw blood trickling down her calf to her ankle, a blinding red, quickly washed away by the rain into a pale pink. That was the baby she had discovered she was carrying less than 2 weeks ago, the one she had not even had the time to tell Carter about. Stella stared at that puddle of blood for a moment. She slowly stood up. She did not cry. Her movements were even steadier and more decisive than usual. She hailed a yellow taxi with an illuminated light. "Mount Sinai Hospital ER," she said, her voice without a single tremor. At 2 in the morning, the harsh white fluorescent lights of the emergency room made her eyes ache. The air smelled of disinfectant and medical alcohol. Stella sat on a cold metal chair, her soaked couture dress clinging tightly to her body. The attending physician walked out holding a sonogram, his brow furrowed, a trace of pity in his eyes. "Miss Monroe." The doctor glanced down the hallway. "Is your family not here?" "No family." Stella looked at the paper in the doctor's hand. "The fetal heartbeat is extremely weak, accompanied by massive hemorrhaging. It is a classic threatened miscarriage." The doctor sighed. "If you admit yourself immediately, stay on bed rest, and take progesterone injections, there might be a 30% chance to save it. But this requires a family member to sign off on the risks." Stella's gaze fell on the clock hanging on the wall. The second hand ticked forward 1 notch at a time. Tick, tock. "Do not save it," Stella said. The doctor froze. "Excuse me," I said. "Do not save it." Stella lifted her eyes, her gaze as clear as a block of ice. "Schedule the procedure now. Miss Monroe, this is a life. Do not need to think about it or call your husband to discuss it, doctor." Stella interrupted him. "Please hand me the consent form." 5 minutes later, Stella independently signed all the paperwork. Every stroke was heavy. Without a shred of hesitation, the doors to the operating room opened. Stella changed into a hospital gown and lay on the narrow operating table. The blinding surgical lights flared above her, forcing her to instinctively close her eyes. The moment the cold metal instruments entered her body, a violent, tearing pain instantly pierced through her bones. Stella's fingers gripped the rails of the operating table with a death grip. Her nails turned white from the force, a bruised hue showing through her knuckles. "Relax. Take deep breaths," the nurse beside her murmured soothingly. Stella made no sound. Her breathing grew rapid and fragmented. In the second the machinery activated, a single tear slipped from the corner of her eye, quickly disappearing into the hair at her temples. That was the first tear she shed tonight, and the last. Right before the anesthesiologist pushed the painkillers, Stella raised the back of her hand and roughly, forcefully wiped away every trace of moisture from her eyes. An hour later, Stella walked out of the recovery room. Her face was deathly pale, and her gait was a little stiff, but her spine remained perfectly straight. She walked to the billing window, swiped her card, and took all the receipts. Outside the hospital, the rain had stopped. The city at 4 in the morning exuded a deathly stillness. Stella took out her phone and dialed an overseas number. After 3 rings, a fluent female voice picked up. "Valerie," Stella began, her voice raspy. "God, CA, it is 10 at night in Paris. Why is the invisible woman who vanished for 3 years suddenly calling me?" The woman on the other end sounded utterly shocked. "Book me a flight, the earliest one. I do not care where, as long as it leaves the country." Stella stood in the shadows beneath the hospital awning, watching the traffic light blink across the street. "What happened? Is CIA coming back?" "Yes," Stella said. "Unfreeze my independent trust account at the Swiss bank. Contact the legal department to prepare to take over my private affairs." The other end fell silent for 2 seconds, followed by the crisp, efficient clatter of a keyboard. "There is a flight to Zurich in 3 hours. I am issuing the ticket now. Thank you." Hanging up, Stella took a car back to the Sterling estate in Greenwich. Pushing the door open, the house was pitch black. The air still carried the faint scent of the crisp cedar cologne Carter had sprayed when he left that morning. Stella did not turn on the main lights. She only switched on a single sconce in the foyer. She walked into the master bedroom, pulled a 20-in black carry-on suitcase from the bottom shelf of the walk-in closet. She did not pack any of the seasonal couture dresses. She did not pack the 6-figure exotic leather bags. She certainly did not pack any of the expensive jewelry Carter routinely had delivered to her every month. She only took her passport, IDs, a few basic everyday outfits, and a heavily encrypted personal laptop. 15 minutes later, the suitcase was full. Stella zipped it up and stood it by the bed. She turned around, her gaze falling on the massive king-sized bed in the center of the room, finally locking onto the velvet settee at its foot. There sat an exquisite gift box. Inside was a dark blue silk tie. At the tip of the tie, a discreet letter S was hand-embroidered with highly complex silver thread. Stella had spent 3 entire months secretly stitching it, needle by needle. Carter's birthday was the day after tomorrow. She had originally planned to give it to him after tonight's gala. Stella walked over and picked up the tie. The silk felt cool and smooth. She turned, walked to the study desk, opened a drawer and pulled out a pair of sharp tailoring shears. Snip! The first cut severed the letter S that represented Carter. The silver thread snapped, curling up into frayed ends. Snip! The second cut severed the tie right down the middle. Stella showed no expression. Her hands were incredibly steady. The sound of the scissors opening and closing was exceptionally clear in the dead, silent room. She cut that priceless tie into which she had poured 3 months of her heart into pile after pile of fabric shreds. Finally, she swept the pile of scraps into her hand, walked to the living room, and expressionlessly dumped them into the trash can next to the marble coffee table. After doing all this, Stella took a stack of papers from her purse. It was the medical records, the sonogram, and that surgical consent form bearing her signature. The form clearly bore a red stamp reading, "Procedure completed." Stella laid this stack of papers flat right in the center of the coffee table. To prevent them from blowing away, she grabbed the baccarat crystal tumbler Carter usually drank water from and weighed down one corner of the pages. At 5:30 in the morning, Stella rolled her black suitcase out the front door of the estate. The horizon was already turning a pale gray. The morning mist carried a bone-chilling cold. She pulled the front door shut, listening to the electronic lock emit a sharp beep as it automatically engaged. She did not look back, not even once. She got into her pre-booked black car and disappeared down the winding driveway before the first ray of morning sun pierced the clouds. At 9 in the morning, a black Rolls-Royce pulled smoothly to a stop in front of the estate. Carter pushed the door open and stepped out. His suit jacket was draped over his arm and in his hand, he held a dark blue velvet jewelry box. After the gala ended last night, Chloe had dragged him to the hospital for a whole night of tests. Leaving the hospital at dawn, he recalled the look in Stella's eyes when she left the ballroom. An inexplicable, Irritable frustration rose in his chest. He had gone to the auction backstage, swiped his black card, and bought a $10 million diamond necklace. This was his usual method, a slap followed by a sweet treat. Stella was a smart woman. As long as he offered her an out, she would take it and continue being the perfect, obedient Mrs. Sterling. Carter pushed the front doors open and changed his shoes. "Stella," he called out, his tone carrying its usual commanding edge. "Come down." The house was dead quiet. There was no response whatsoever. Carter frowned slightly. He walked into the living room and tossed the jewelry box onto the sofa. Still throwing a tantrum, he loosened his tie, his gaze casually sweeping across the coffee table. That stack of white papers instantly grabbed his attention. The crystal tumbler weighed them down. The top sheet was a sonogram. Next to the black and white image were a few lines of cold text. Carter's footsteps halted. He stared at those words, his pupils shrinking slightly. He walked over, reached out, moved the crystal glass, and pulled the stack of papers free. Threatened miscarriage accompanied by massive hemorrhaging, surgical consent form, patient signature, Stella Monroe. The red stamp on the bottom right corner of that last page stung Carter's eyes. His fingers suddenly tightened. The paper was crushed into deep creases in his palm. His knuckles turned a bloodless white from the force. "Stella!" Carter's voice abruptly spiked, carrying a trace of panic. He did not even realize himself. He took massive strides up to the second-floor bedroom and shoved the door open. The closet door was wide open. In Stella's section, her most frequently worn outfits were gone. That black carry-on suitcase that always sat in the corner had also vanished. Carter's breathing stalled for a second. He spun around, his gaze sweeping over the settee at the foot of the bed. The box that had held his birthday present was empty. His eyes frantically searched the room, finally locking onto the wastebasket next to the vanity. A pile of dark blue silk shreds lay quietly inside. A few broken silver threads gleamed with a mocking cold light in the morning sun. She had cut it to pieces herself. She had destroyed not just a tie, but all her unreserved devotion from the past 3 years, and the very last link between them. Carter's eyelids twitched violently. An unprecedented, massive sense of dread gripped his heart like an invisible hand. The baby was gone. She had left. She took nothing with her. She only took herself, personally, destroying every trace she left behind. Carter immediately pulled out his phone. His fingers were so uncooperative that he swiped the screen wrong twice before dialing Stella's number. Deathly silence answered from the earpiece. Then came a cold, mechanical female voice. "We are sorry. The number you have dialed is currently powered off." Carter gripped his phone tightly, standing in the center of the empty bedroom. The early autumn sunlight fell on him, but he felt no warmth, only a bone-deep coldness spreading all the way from soles of his feet to his heart. Jenkins, terminate every black card and supplementary credit card under Stella's name. Carter stood in the trashed bedroom, tightly clutching that crumpled surgical consent form in his hand. His voice had no inflection, but the rapid rising and falling of his chest betrayed his breathing. The assistant on the other end clearly froze, taking 2 seconds to cautiously confirm. "Mr. Sterling, all of them, even the Limitless Centurion card under her name, all of them." Carter cut him off. "Notify our corporate aviation agents and private flight crews. Without my signature, Stella cannot charter any aircraft. Also, call her private wealth managers at Chase and Citibank. Freeze her domestic trust withdrawal privileges." Hanging up, Carter stared at the baccarat crystal tumbler discarded on the coffee table. 3 days, he thought coldly. A woman who had just undergone abortion surgery with zero financial resources, who for the past 3 years had done nothing but arrange flowers and read books at home once he cut off her cash flow and travel options. How many days could she survive out there? Shredding the tie, leaving the medical bills. It was nothing but a self-destructive tactic to force him to bow his head. Carter slowly smoothed out the crumpled surgical form in his hand and pinned it back beneath the crystal glass. His jawline was pulled taut. He would never bow his head. The head of Sterling Enterprises would never allow anyone to challenge his absolute authority in such a definitive manner. Changed the security codes on the front gates. Carter threw an order to the butler waiting outside, picked up his suit jacket, and strode out the door. The rain in Zurich was freezing. Stella, wearing a black trench coat, walked out of the airport's VIP terminal. Cold wind blew down her collar. She subconsciously stopped, her right hand pressing tightly against her lower abdomen. A sharp, dragging pain radiated from deep within her pelvis. A fine layer of cold sweat broke out on her forehead. See, the blonde woman who had been waiting outside the terminal walked up quickly, grabbing her arm. Valerie looked at Stella's ghostly pale face, her brows knitting tightly. "You need to go to a hospital right now. You look like a piece of paper." Stella closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, the pain in her eyes had been completely suppressed. "No need. Go to the notary office." Stella stood up straight, releasing her hand from her stomach. "Have they made a move in the States?" Valerie handed her a tablet. The screen displayed several urgent emails. 10 minutes ago, the finance department at Sterling Enterprises froze all your supplementary credit cards. Additionally, they issued restriction orders to the private banks. Several of your domestic accounts are now locked. Stella looked at the freeze notices on the screen, swiped her finger gently, and moved the email straight to the trash. Slower than I expected. She handed the tablet back to Valerie, pulled open the car door, and got in. "Did you contact the private security team back home? Did they get to the Greenwich estate?" They did, but Valerie got into the driver's seat and started the car. Even though Carter changed the codes, the security team had top-tier physical override access and got in. It is just that the inventory list you provided, those 47 pieces of high jewelry and the dozen 18th-century antiques, the logistical cost to pack and ship all of that out is astronomical. Plus, it requires special customs declarations. It will take half a month at the earliest. The car merged onto the slick Swiss highway. Stella looked out the window at the retreating pine forests. Her voice was light, yet every word was distinct. "Who said we are shipping them out?" Valerie's foot paused on the gas pedal. "Not shipping them out. The estimated value of those items combined is over $300 million. Leave them there for Carter to reclaim. Go buy 2 heavy-duty industrial sledgehammers." Stella withdrew her gaze. "Have the security team turn on all their body cams. Make sure every corner is recorded." Valerie glanced at Stella in the rearview mirror. "Smash all the emeralds and diamonds into powder. Shatter the antiques into pieces. Take a pair of scissors and shred the Hermes Birkins and all the couture dresses into strips." Stella's speaking pace was unhurried. "After everything is destroyed, sweep all the fragments into industrial trash bags. Pack them into wooden crates, and use the fastest international freight to mail them to the mailroom at Sterling Enterprises headquarters." "Address to the CEO," Valerie gasped. "CIA, that is $300 million. That is the garbage I traded 3 years of endurance and a dead child for." Stella took out her phone, popped out her American SIM card, and casually tossed it into the car's ashtray. "It is dirty." 5 days later, in the top-floor CEO office of Sterling Enterprises in New York, Carter sat behind his massive desk, his fingers tapping impatiently on the solid wood surface. Assistant Jenkins stood before the desk, his head bowed low. "Mr. Sterling, the Monroe family," responded. Arthur Monroe stated that his daughter has not contacted the family these past few days. He also said that if his daughter is throwing a tantrum over Miss Bennett, he will personally call and reprimand her, telling her to prioritize the alliance between the Sterling and Monroe families. Carter's fingers stopped tapping. 5 days, no spending records, no contact with her parents, not a single cent touched in her domestic accounts. She had evaporated from the face of the earth. Carter's eyes darkened. He reached up, loosened his tie, picked up his phone and opened his messages. He found Stella's contact. The last message was still the one he sent at the gala 5 days ago. "Get the hell home and reflect on your behavior." Carter stared at that sentence for a moment, then his fingers flew across the keyboard. "Stella, your Cold War game needs to end. I have stopped all your cards. Even your father thinks you are being unreasonable. As long as you fly back before Friday, I can pretend none of this happened. The business with Chloe ends here. The position of Mrs. Sterling is still yours." He typed the message, felt it was not enough, and added another line. "You do not have a penny to your name. You cannot even afford a hotel. Do not force my hand. Hit send." A red exclamation mark immediately popped up on the screen. Message not delivered. Carter's eyelid twitched violently. He stared at that red exclamation mark, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the phone. Blocked. She actually dared to block him. Good, very good. Carter let out a cold laugh and slammed the phone face down on the desk. Go check her passport departure records. Use every connection we have to find out exactly which country she went to. I refuse to believe she can vanish into thin air. Jenkins jumped, terrified. Just as he turned to leave, the office door was shoved open by the secretary. Mr. Sterling. The secretary's face was ashen, pointing out the door. The mailroom downstairs sent up several massive international freight crates. They said, Mrs. Sterling specifically requested they be delivered directly to your office. Carter sat up dead straight. A faint cold smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. She broke, after all, mailing her luggage back. This was a prelude to surrendering, a way to test his bottom line. Bring them in. Carter leaned back in his chair and adjusted his cuffs. 4 heavy wooden crates, each over 3 feet wide, were hauled into the spacious office by several security guards. The crates bore international shipping labels from Bern, Switzerland. "Open them," Carter ordered. The guards brought crowbars and pried off the nails of the first crate one by one. The sound of wooden planks hitting the floor echoed with a dull thud in the quiet office. Carter casually picked up his coffee cup. The moment the lid was lifted, a smell of dusty leather and debris rushed out. Jenkins leaned in to look, and his entire body froze instantly like a statue encased in ice. "What are you staring at? What is inside?" Carter frowned. Jenkins's Adam's apple bobbed with difficulty, his voice trembling. "Mr. Sterling, you should look for yourself." Carter put down his coffee cup, stood up, and strode over to the crate. The second his eyes fell upon the contents, Carter's pupils constricted sharply. There were no neatly folded clothes. There were no letters begging for peace. Inside the crate was a pile of absolute ruin. That $15 million emerald necklace he had won for her at Christie's was now broken into a dozen pieces. The green gemstones had been pulverized by some heavy object covered in fine cracks and coated in dust. That antique Fabra egg, which he had specifically told Stella to wipe down carefully, was now a pile of colorful shards resting quietly at the bottom. Beside it lay dozens of shredded Hermes Birkin bags. The exotic crocodile and ostrich leathers had been violently ripped apart. Zippers and metal clasps scattered everywhere. All 4 wooden crates were entirely filled with this kind of garbage. Carter's breathing stopped. He stared dead at the broken emerald necklace in the crate. That was the one he had personally clasped around Stella's neck on their first anniversary. His footsteps paused. He suddenly took a step forward and reached his hands into the ruins to dig. A sharp shard cut his finger. Blood dripped onto the ruined leather, but he seemed to feel no pain, no letter, not a single word, only the most complete and utter destruction. Silence, a deathly silence. The secretary and guards in the office did not even dare to breathe. Just then, the private landline on Carter's desk rang abruptly. It was an encrypted number. Only a very few people knew it. Carter spun around, took massive strides back to the desk, and snatched up the receiver. "Stella." Carter's voice was frighteningly like sandpaper grinding against glass. "Are you insane? You smashed $300 million worth of things, and you think this proves you have a spine?" From the other end came Stella's incredibly calm voice. No ripples, no anger. Even the rhythm of her breathing was steady. "Garbage received." "Who gave you the nerve to do this?" Carter's fingers gripped the receiver so tightly, his nails dug deep into his palm. "All your cards were cut. Did you think smashing these things would make me give you a second look? Stella, you are penniless right now. With one word from me, you will not even have the money to buy a ticket back home. Are you done speaking?" As Stella's voice fell, The sound of pages turning came through the phone. Carter froze. On the 17th of last month, Stella's voice was like a cold surgical scalpel, precisely cutting through all of Carter's facades. A payment of $3.5 million was routed through the Sterling Enterprises PR account to buy a PC Philippe watch for Chloe Bennett. The invoice code is P4092. Carter's eyelid twitched violently. A chill shot up his spine. That transaction was hidden flawlessly, processed as an expense for high-priority client gifts through corporate accounts. For 3 years, Stella had never asked about the company. She only ever played the role of the quiet Mrs. Sterling at home. How did she know? You actually audited the corporate accounts. A trace of disbelief bled into Carter's voice. Stella, you have learned how to play games. Last November. Stella ignored his questioning, continuing to read in that temperatureless voice under the guise of an overseas investment for Sterling. You set up a shell company in the Cayman Islands and transferred $40 million into it. The ultimate destination of those funds was a medical trust account for Chloe Bennett in the United States. Carter staggered a half-step back, his calf slamming into the edge of his office chair, his throat tightened. All of these documents were stamped with my personal seal. You used my identity as Mrs. Sterling to underwrite your asset transfers for your first love. Stella let out a soft laugh on the other end. There was no humor in that laugh, only complete and utter apathy. Carter, at the very bottom of the 4th crate, there is a black velvet box. Inside is my personal seal. Carter's head snapped toward the 4th crate a few feet away. I already had someone take an industrial saw and cut the seal in half, Stella said. Consider this a notification. Do not ever send those arrogant text messages to my American number again. Stella, you would not dare. Beep, beep, beep. The call was cleanly disconnected. Carter stood paralyzed, listening to the dial tone. He slowly lowered the receiver, walking step by step toward the 4th crate. Ignoring the glass shards and shredded fabric, he reached to the very bottom. Beneath a pile of ruined clothing, he found the small black velvet box. He opened it. A piece of pristine white jade lay quietly inside, except it had been sliced perfectly down the middle. The cut was smooth and flat, forcibly splitting the engraved name Stella Monroe into 2 completely severed halves. Carter stared at the 2 broken pieces of jade, his stomach suddenly cramping. He had always believed Stella was a vine that could only survive by clinging to him. If he cut off her nutrients, she would wither, she would compromise. But now, this vine had not only severed her own roots, but before leaving, she had smashed a massive hole in the wall that supported her. Mr. Sterling, Jenkins called out tentatively, watching Carter's bloodless fingers. Carter ignored him. He pulled out his phone and dialed the encrypted number that had just called him. We are sorry, the number you have dialed is out of service. Carter's thumb pressed down hard on the screen until it went black. Standing amidst $300 million of ruins, looking out at the Manhattan skyscrapers, the ruler of this absolute empire felt for the very first time a panic named loss of control crawling up his spine along the edges of that shattered jade. Put her name on the industry blacklist. By the end of the day, I want confirmed stamped letters from every reputable jewelry brand and couture house in the country. Carter sat in his black leather office chair, twirling a solid gold pen. His gaze never left the quarterly financial reports in front of him. His voice was so calm it lacked any fluctuation. Assistant Jenkins stood before the desk, holding a thick stack of files, swallowing hard. Mr. Sterling, the calls have been made. Half the major fashion and jewelry corporations in the country have added Stella's name to their HR blacklists. No legitimate organization will dare hire her. Additionally, the credit card centers at all major banks have rejected her request to open new primary accounts. Carter's pen paused, leaving a dark blue ink blot on the paper. Has she contacted anyone these past 3 months? He looked up. No. Her American phone number has remained deactivated. We have people watching her parents. But they have not received any international packages or calls. Arthur Monroe was just complaining at a Chamber of Commerce dinner 2 days ago that Stella is ungrateful and did not even call for Thanksgiving. Carter tossed the pen onto the desk with a dull thud. 3 months, exactly 90 days, ever since the day he blew up over the smashed jewelry. Stella had vanished off the face of the earth. He originally thought cutting the seal and smashing the items was just the peak of her emotional outburst. Once the adrenaline wore off, a woman accustomed to luxury, weakened by a recent surgery, stranded in a foreign country, would eventually run out of options. He sealed every avenue for her to find a job. He wanted her to clearly realize that without Carter, without the title of Mrs. Sterling, she did not even have the right to survive in this society. The office door was pushed open gently. Chloe, wearing a loose cashmere cardigan and holding a thermos, walked in. She wore very light makeup, making her look even paler. "Carter, you stayed up late at the office again." Chloe set the thermos down, looking at the dark circles under his eyes with heartache. "I had the chef make some soup. You should drink some." Carter's gaze fell on the thermos. He did not move. His fingers unconsciously tapped twice on the armrest. "Chloe, I have a multinational video conference soon." His tone softened slightly, but his body did not lean toward her. "Your health is poor. You should not make special trips to the office. I was just worried about you." Chloe lowered her head, twisting the hem of her shirt. "The stock for the luxury division has been plummeting lately. I heard from the board. It is because of what happened at the gala. It damaged the brand's high-end image." "Carter, am I causing you trouble again? If Stella is still mad, I can fly overseas and apologize to her in person. It has nothing to do with you." Carter cut her off, frowning. "The stock is fluctuating because our flagship collection for the second half of the year lacks the endorsement of a top-tier international designer. I have already handled the board." But Chloe bit her lower lip. "I heard the global haute couture finale in Paris next month is critical for the industry. That legendary top designer CIA will announce her exclusive partner for next year after the show. If we can secure a contract with CIA, the stock will stabilize." "Carter, can you take me to Paris? I want to help you, and I want to wear one of Saya's custom gowns to experience it." Carter looked at her expectant eyes and fell silent for a few seconds. Paris. The last trace he had of Stella was in Europe. Though the trail went cold quickly, he had a gut feeling she was still there. "All right." Carter withdrew his gaze. "Have Jenkins book the tickets for next Monday." 3 months later, the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons Hotel, George V, Paris. Jenkins placed 2 gold foil invitations on the marble coffee table, fine sweat beading on his forehead. "Mr. Sterling, these are the tickets for tonight's finale show." His voice was weak. Carter stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, buttoning his French cuffs. He turned around, his gaze sweeping over the invitations, his face instantly darkening. "Zone D, second row." Carter's footsteps stopped. "Sterling Enterprises is one of the top 3 luxury financiers in the American market, and you are telling me we only secured the second row in the outer rim?" Jenkins wiped his forehead, not daring to look up. "Mr. Sterling, the seating chart for tonight's finale was personally drafted by Antoine Dupont, the head of the Global Haute Couture Committee. In their circle, they only care about design lineage and industry prestige. Financiers do not rank high in their eyes. We only got Zone D by leveraging high-level connections at several European partner banks." The bedroom door opened. Chloe walked out wearing an incredibly expensive gown. Hearing Jenkins's words, her smile froze. "Carter, cannot we sit in the front row?" Chloe walked up and gently took his arm. "I heard the front row tonight as all European royalty and global fashion elites. If we sit in the second row, will not the media back home say Sterling is being marginalized?" Carter's fingers slowly tightened, the veins on the back of his hand bulging slightly. He withdrew his arm from Chloe's grasp and smoothed the hem of his suit. "The seating is not the point tonight." Carter looked at the invitations, his eyelid twitching slightly. "The point is the VIP afterparty. No matter the cost, I need CIA's signature tonight. As long as we secure an exclusive contract with CIA, we will be VIPs of the committee next year." He pulled out his phone and checked the screen. In his contacts, that familiar profile picture was still sitting quietly in the blocked list without a single movement. Over the past 3 months, he had poured vast resources across Europe, looking for Stella, but it was like searching for a needle in a haystack. That woman had seemingly been wiped from the face of the earth. Let us go. Carter slid his phone into his breast pocket and strode toward the door. The private dressing rooms backstage at the Grand P. The air smelled of white tea perfume. Outside the door, the sound of runway music, testing and walkie-talkies was chaotic and deafening, but inside it was so quiet one could hear the rustle of fabric. Stella sat alone in front of a massive vanity mirror. She wore a sharply tailored plunging black waist-cinching blazer. She wore no complicated jewelry, only a sharp architectural silver ring on her right index finger. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her once soft jawline was now as sharp as a blade. Her face was still slightly pale, but her eyes held a razor-sharp intensity that made people afraid to look directly at her. She slowly raised her hand and pressed it against her lower abdomen. A hidden dull ache pulsed along her nerves. 2 straight months of grueling design work, pulling all-nighters on 4 hours of sleep, meant her body had not entirely recovered from that ruthless surgery. Stella's fingers dug slightly into the blazer's fabric, her nails pressing into her palms. She closed her eyes. In the quiet dressing room, only her slightly heavy breathing could be heard. 2 seconds. She only gave herself 2 seconds. 2 seconds later, Stella opened her eyes. The exhaustion and fleeting vulnerability in the mirror were completely purged. In their place was absolute calm and ice. Click. The door opened. Valerie walked in swiftly, holding a walkie-talkie. "See you. The front guests are all seated. Mr. Dupont is waiting for you at the VIP entrance at the end of the red carpet. The Sterling people are here, too." "They are seated in Zone D." Stella stood up, casually, grabbing a file from the table and handing it to Valerie. "Have the legal team ready." Valerie took the file, glanced at it, and inhaled sharply. "Are you sure you want to pull the trigger tonight? This will cause an earthquake in the financial and fashion worlds. Sterling stock will probably crash at the opening bell tomorrow. Get it done." Stella offered no explanation. She stepped in her 4-in stilettos, pushed open the door, and walked steadily into the hallway lights. Outside the Grand Pal, autumn rain fell steadily. The red carpet was flanked by global media and flashing cameras. Black umbrellas bloomed in the night like mushrooms. Carter and Chloe, guided by staff, finished walking the red carpet and stood waiting at the VIP security checkpoint. "Carter, exactly who is this C person?" Chloe complained impatiently. "Making even you wait in line here. She is too arrogant. Later at the party, you have to introduce me. I want her to personally design my wedding dress." Before Chloe could finish, the surrounding cameras suddenly flashed like crazy, illuminating half the night sky in stark white. Every reporter turned back toward the start of the red carpet. Lenses zoomed in. A black Maybach, with a special Paris City Hall license plate, glided silently into the red carpet drop-off zone. The security at the VIP checkpoint instantly pulled the barricades tight. Carter frowned and looked over. People who commanded this kind of treatment in Europe could be counted on one hand. Antoine Dupont, the white-haired patriarch who held absolute power in the fashion world, was actually holding a large black umbrella himself, walking swiftly to the Maybach's rear door. He did not let the valet touch it. He opened the door himself. A foot wearing a black-pointed stiletto stepped firmly onto the rain-slicked, red carpet. Next, a tall, slender figure emerged from the car. The black blazer traced a silhouette of overwhelming dominance. Her long hair was pinned back sharply, revealing a long, pale neck. The sound of camera shutters was deafening. Carter's gaze swept over casually, but the moment it touched that face, it was as if he had been struck by lightning. He was nailed to the spot. His breathing completely stopped, his pupils violently contracted, his heart brutally squeezed by an invisible hand. Stella, standing at the end of the red carpet, personally escorted by Antoine Dupont, chased frantically by hundreds of global media outlets. That woman was Stella. Carter's fingers tightened violently. The handle of his black umbrella let out a sickening crack. The blood drained entirely from his knuckles, leaving them a ghastly white. "That is impossible." Chloe covered her mouth, her voice trembling. That is Stella. How could she get into Zone A? Why is that old man holding an umbrella for her? Carter did not answer. His brain was buzzing. He saw Stella turn her head and whisper something to DuPont. DuPont, a man notorious for his sternness, actually smiled with extreme deference, even bowing slightly as he guided her toward the main doors. Stella kept her gaze fixed forward. Her eyes swept over the guests waiting in Zone D without stopping for a fraction of a second. As she walked past, less than 10 feet from Carter, he subconsciously took a half step forward. Stella. Carter's voice was terribly horsaro, his Adam's apple bobbing with difficulty. Stella's footsteps did not pause in the slightest. She did not even turn her head to look at him. It was as if he were merely an invisible prop by the red carpet, carrying an aura of suffocating coldness and pressure, surrounded by dozens of security guards. She walked straight through the massive gold doors in the center of the grand pallet doors, reserved exclusively for royalty and top-tier VIPs. The doors slowly closed in Carter's face. Carter stood rigidly in the rain, his eyelids twitching violently. The cold rain beat against his shoulders, but he felt nothing. For 3 months, he thought she was starving in a slum. He thought she was regretting her choices, begging for a ticket home. But she was not. She had stepped onto a pedestal he had to beg just to glimpse, stepping right over his head. The finale show lasted 2 full hours. Sitting in the second row of Zone D, Carter had no mind to look at any of the clothes on the runway. His gaze was fixed like a nail on the back of the figure sitting dead center in the first row of Zone A. Stella sat at the absolute core of the show. On her left was DuPont. On her right was the head of France's oldest conglomerate. These titans of business and fashion leaned in to whisper to her, their attitudes humble and eager. Chloe sat beside him, her fingers practically shredding her dress. She was going mad with jealousy. Yet she did not even dare breathe too loudly. The music stopped. The lights blazed. The MC took the stage and announced in passionate French, "Tonight we extend our deepest gratitude to the soul of this grand show, the youngest lifetime member of our Haute Couture Committee, Madame Sia." The entire venue stood up. Thunderous applause erupted. Sitting center stage in the front row, Stella slowly stood. She turned around facing the entire audience and offered a slight acknowledging nod. The spotlight hit her face. Cold, noble, untouchable. Carter took a sudden half-step back, his knee hitting the seat behind him. She was CIA, the god of the industry that Sterling Enterprises had spent 3 months and countless resources trying to beg for a 5-minute meeting with at night's party was her. The wife he had personally slapped, whose credit cards he had cut off. Carter's chest heaved violently, a sense of utter absurdity and an unprecedented panic intertwined, shooting straight to his skull. Half an hour later, the top-floor VIP business mixer. There was no media here, only true financiers and brand principals. Carter had Jenkins send Chloe back to the hotel. He stood alone, holding Sterling's thick partnership proposal, navigating through the crowd toward the center of the room, to the area surrounded by stars. Stella was holding a glass of champagne, listening to the CEO of an Italian brand speak. Stella Carter's voice rang out behind her, laced with extreme suppressed tension. The surrounding people stopped tongue, their gazes darting between the two. DuPont frowned and was about to call security, but Stella gently raised a hand, stopping him. She turned around. Her gaze fell lightly onto Carter's face. No anger, no surprise, like looking at an irrelevant document. Carter stared at her. He tried to find a trace of a facade in her eyes, but he failed. He took a deep breath, forcing out the aura of the head of Sterling Enterprises, lowering his voice. "Do you think changing your identity and putting on a show in Paris erases your liability for destroying $300 million of assets? Who elevated you to this position? To get back at me, who'd you sell yourself to?" Stella's gaze fell on his tie. She did not speak. Carter thought he had hit a nerve. His tone became more certain, carrying a condescending sense of charity. "Stop making a scene. I issued the industry blacklist back home just to teach you a lesson. I know the past 3 months have been incredibly hard on you, which is why you use this extreme method to get my attention. Come back with me. I can give you the creative director position of Sterling's new luxury line. He even reached out, wanting to grab Stella's wrist. Mr. Sterling. Stella finally spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it carried clearly to everyone's ears. She did not step back, nor did she dodge his hand. She simply looked at him with the eyes of someone looking at a corpse. Did you bring the Sterling's Enterprises partnership proposal? She asked. Carter's hand froze in midair. He paused, subconsciously, handing over the proposal in his left hand. He thought she was finally taking the out, agreeing to cooperate. Stella did not take it. Valerie stepped forward, took the 100-page document, flipped to the last page, and presented it to Stella. Stella pulled a silver fountain pen from her blazer pocket. Article 7 of your proposal demands that Sterling holds a 60% equity stake in the joint brand and requires the production line to rely on the century-old silk factory. Sterling acquired in Lyon, Stella said, her pace steady, stating objective facts. Carter frowned. That was Sterling's core trump card. The Lyon factory was their capital for expanding into Europe. How did this woman know it so clearly? He straightened his back. Sterling's supply chain is the best in Europe. Once you sign, you can have anything you want. In the acquisition contract for the Lyon factory 2 years ago, there was a proxy holding addendum. Stella interrupted him, her voice freezing cold. Carter's eyelid twitched. What do you mean? I mean, that factory does not belong to Sterling Enterprises. Stella looked at him, the corners of her mouth lacking even a fraction of a curve. It was wholly acquired by my private trust fund. You are merely managing it on proxy. Carter's pupils shrank to pinpricks. His breathing instantly fell into chaos. That acquisition 2 years ago was incredibly complex. Stella had never asked about corporate affairs. How could she have used her trust? Wait, that was the hidden account Arthur Monroe had set up for her before the wedding. This morning at 8, Stella uncapped the silver pen. I notified the Lyon factory to indefinitely cease supplying any raw materials to Sterling. Sterling's luxury production lines in Europe are now completely paralyzed. Carter took a sudden step forward, his fingers curling into tight fists, his knuckles so white they threatened to pierce his skin. He had always thought he controlled everything. He thought cutting her cards cut her lifeline. He never expected that over the past 3 years, she had quietly held a knife to his jugular. Stella gave him no room to breathe. Holding the silver pen, she pressed down on Sterling's proposal, the document Carter saw as a lifeline, and drew a massive, merciless X from the top left to the bottom right corner. The sound of the nib tearing the paper was deafeningly harsh in the quiet room. Your proposal is rejected. Stella casually tossed the proposal at Carter's feet, the heavy document scattered over the expensive carpet. Take your garbage and get the hell out of my show. After saying this, she tossed the pen to Valerie, turned, and walked toward the VIP lounge, never giving him another glance. Carter stood completely alone in the center of the crowd. The European fashion elites looked at him like he was a clown. He looked down at the shredded proposal at his feet. It felt as if a fistful of crushed glass was stuck in his throat. He could not swallow it, and he could not spit it out. A massive sense of lost control, and the terror of being utterly crushed, finally crawled up his stiff spine, spreading wildly through his entire body. Stella pressed her right palm flat against the massive floor-to-ceiling window of her design studio. The cold Paris rain hammered heavily against the exterior glass. Trails of water snaked down, blurring the neon lights of the streets below. The cold radiating from the glass seeped into her skin, but she did not pull her hand back. From deep in her lower abdomen came a slow, heavy ache. 2 weeks of high-intensity pattern drafting, combined with the taxing business warfare at tonight's party, had pushed her body to the brink of collapse. Stella closed her eyes and rested her forehead against the cold glass. Her breathing was very light and shallow. Every inhalation came with an unavoidable soreness in her lower back. Her fingers unconsciously curled against the glass, her nails scraping the smooth surface with a faint squeak. The internal intercom on her drafting table suddenly flashed red. See you. Valerie's voice came through mixed with obvious panic and background noise. There is a situation downstairs that Carter Sterling forced his way in. Security cannot stop him. He is getting physical. Do we call the police? Stella slowly lifted her forehead from the glass. The exhaustion and the physiological mist of pain in her eyes were completely purged within the half-second it took to blink. Do not call the police. Stella turned around, her voice perfectly level. Let him up. 5 minutes later, the heavy double wooden doors of the studio were violently shoved open from the outside with a dull thud. The doors hit the wall stoppers and bounced back. Carter stood in the doorway. His expensive Brion cashmere coat was completely soaked. Rainwater dripped from his disheveled hair. His tie was yanked askew, and the top 2 buttons of his shirt had popped off, revealing collarbones that heaved violently with his rapid breathing. The man who was usually immaculate and untouchable now looked like a trapped beast that had lost its way in a storm and completely broken down. Stella stood behind the massive solid wood drafting table, holding a pair of silver tailoring shears. She watched him walk in calmly. 2 massive French security guards followed closely behind Carter, batons drawn. With a single look from Stella, they would pounce. Stella raised the hand holding the shears and waved it gently twice. The guards exchanged a glance, backed out of the room, and pulled the doors shut. The massive studio was left with only the white noise of rain against glass. And Carter's heavy, ragged breathing, he took long strides through the fabric scraps and dress forms. Walking straight to the drafting table, water dripped from his coat onto the expensive Persian rug, blooming into dark stains. Are you satisfied now? Carter planted both hands on the drafting table, staring dead into Stella's eyes. His eyes were bloodshot. His eyelids twitched uncontrollably. Sterling's 4 core supply chains in Europe completely shut down this morning. The stock hit the limit down as soon as the market opened. $30 billion evaporated in one morning. The board of directors is sitting in my office right now, slamming their fists on the table. Carter's voice was so raspy, it sounded like it had been sanded. Stella, you did all this just to force me to come find you, did you not? Stella set down the shears. The metal hitting the wood made a cold, crisp sound. You are blocking my blueprints, she said. Carter's breathing stalled. He looked at her emotionless face. His fingers slowly tightened on the desk, his knuckles turning a ghastly white from the force. He took a deep breath, straightened up suddenly, and pulled a manila envelope from the inner pocket of his soaked coat. He slammed it onto the blueprints in front of Stella. I sent Chloe away. Carter's pace quickened, carrying an urgent need to prove himself. I had people fly her to Boston overnight. I cut off all credit cards in her name and took back the house I lent her parents. She will never appear in front of us again. What happened at the charity gala? I was impulsive. I apologize. He paused, pushing the envelope forward slightly. Inside is the deed transfer for the Greenwich estate. I have had the property entirely transferred to your name alone, and a transfer agreement for 10% of Sterling's equity shares. Carter stared at her intently, his tone carrying a desperate plea he did not realize, mixed with his habitual pressure. Stella, if you have vented enough anger, come home with me. You are Mrs. Sterling. We are husband and wife, with your current status and reputation, plus Sterling's capital. When we return to the States, no one will ever dare look down on you again. Stella lowered her eyes, her gaze falling on the corner of the envelope that had been dampened by the rain. She did not reach for it. When did you find out I was in Paris? Stella asked a completely unrelated question. Carter froze. That does not matter. I utilized European Aviation Authority private flight privileges. Stella cut him off, her gaze shifting from the envelope to his face. Because you discovered that the private luxury Santander firm you arranged for Chloe in Boston rejected her admission application this morning. Carter's footsteps faltered. He looked at Stella in disbelief, his pupils expanding uncontrollably. How do you know about the Boston sanatorium? Carter's Adam's apple bobbed violently. Stella picked up the tailoring shears and casually tapped the edge of the envelope. Last Wednesday, you had Jenkins process Chloe's transfer papers. You thought just sending her out of the state would close the chapter. Stella's voice remained perfectly flat, but you did not know that the controlling backer of that facility is my partner. The ink on your signature as her financial guarantor was not even dry before a copy was placed on my desk. Carter's face went deathly pale. You even added a clause to the guarantee stating that all medical expenses would be covered indefinitely by Sterling's offshore accounts. Stella looked at him. Carter, you take 10% of Sterling shares, which are about to become waste paper, and a mortgaged estate to buy the lifetime loyalty of CIA. Meanwhile, you pave a lifelong golden road for your first love. Your calculations are tied tighter than your neckties. That was just out of moral obligation. Carter's voice abruptly rose. He stepped forward, his body slamming heavily against the edge of the drafting table. His fingers dug into the wood, veins popping on the back of his hands. She will not live much longer. I just wanted to send her far away. Stella, the person I actually care about is you. If I did not care about you, would I abandon the mess back home, risk being impeached by the board, and fly 8 hours to Paris to find you? Your care is for Sterling's stock prices. Stella picked up the manila envelope. Carter thought she was finally going to accept it. His tense shoulders relaxed slightly. As long as you sign, we fly back tomorrow and hold a joint press conference. All this turmoil will pass, Carter said eagerly. Stella ignored his words. Holding the envelope, she walked around the drafting table toward a towering industrial-grade paper shredder in the corner of the room. Carter's voice died in his throat. Stella, what are you doing? He spun around, staring at her actions. Stella pressed the green start button. Clear's throat. The machine roared to life with a low hum. She ripped open the envelope, pulled out the thick stack of property deeds and equity transfer agreements, and without looking at a single page, shoved the top document stamped with Sterling's corporate seal vertically into the feed slot. The sharp diamond blades engaged instantly, chewing the priceless agreement into tiny confetti that rained down into the clear bin below. Carter's eyelids twitched violently. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the remaining documents from her hand. Are you crazy? That is 10% of Sterling. Do you know what you are doing? Just as Carter's hand was about to touch the papers, Stella shoved the remaining stack, envelope, and all straight into the shredder. The machine groaned under the load. Carter grasped empty air, his hands slamming against the cold metal casing of the shredder. He looked at the unpieced confetti in the bin, and the final taut string in his brain snapped with a crisp echo. Stella. He turned his head violently, his right hand grabbing Stella's wrist. The force was immense. A red ring instantly appeared on her skin. How long are you going to throw this tantrum? Carter's voice completely lost control, turning into a suppressed roar. He panted heavily in the cold air, his eyes locked onto hers. I have abandoned my pride. I have trampled my own bottom lines. I crossed the Atlantic to beg you. What more do you want from me? Will you only be satisfied when you destroy me, destroy Sterling, destroy every last trace of what we had? His fingers tightened like a vice. He tried to use physical force to reclaim a fraction of the absolute control he once had over this woman. Stella did not struggle. She let him grip her wrist. Her gaze traveled from his white-knuckled fingers up to his eyes. Let go, Stella said. 2 words, no emotional outburst, no hysterical accusations. Carter looked into her eyes. There was no hatred, no resentment, not even basic anger. There was only a void of someone who had seen through everything, and a profound apathy that looked terrified him more than a slap to the face. His fingers stiffened, his grip subconsciously loosening a fraction. Stella neatly pulled her wrist free. She took a step back, establishing physical distance. Then she reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her phone. Carter watched her, swallowing hard. What are you doing? Stella unlocked the screen, opened her contacts, and pulled up that encrypted private number Carter had been trying to use. She turned the phone around, holding it up to his face. Carter clearly saw the screen. It was the emergency contact settings page. Next to his number, it clearly read spouse primary contact. She had forced him to set this up on her phone 3 years ago when they first married. Did you not always want to know how I was certain you would come to Paris tonight? Stella looked at him, her voice crystal clear over the roar of the shredder. Carter's breathing stopped. 3 days ago, I intentionally used this number to log into the flight tracking system back home. Stella's gaze pierced him coldly. I knew your people were monitoring all my old digital footprints. I left this emergency contact access active. I did not delete it just to lure you here. Carter staggered, his back hitting the wall. You lured me here just to humiliate me to my face. His voice trembled. No. Right in front of Carter's eyes, Stella tapped the screen. Remove emergency contact privileges. Confirm. Next, she backed out to the main contact list, swiped left on his name. Delete contact. Confirm. That familiar number vanished completely from the screen. I lured you here so you could watch with your own eyes as I throw the very last connection between us into the trash. Stella put her phone back in her pocket. She looked at the man slumped against the wall, looking entirely drained of strength. You thought coming here with shares and houses was an act of grace. You thought everything I did was to get your attention. Her voice echoed in the cavernous studio. Carter, from the exact second you pulled that ring off my finger at the gala, you were already a dead man to me. Carter stared at her, his lips parted silently, but no sound came out. His hands hung limply at his sides, his fingers trembling from extreme panic and despair. He finally realized she truly did not want him anymore. She was not throwing a tantrum. She was not negotiating. She was thoroughly, completely uprooting him from her life. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., my legal team will formally submit a breach of contract lawsuit against Sterling Enterprises to the International Court of Arbitration. Stella turned and walked back to the drafting table. Get out of my studio. Do not step foot in my territory ever again. Carter stood rigidly. The French guards opened the door and flanked him, gesturing for him to leave. Carter did not resist. Like a shell drained of its soul, he walked slowly toward the door, step by step. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back. Stella had already picked up her shears, her head bowed in focus over her blueprints. Her back was straight and sharp, as if the conversation that had just shattered his entire world was nothing more than an insignificant speck of dust. The shredder had stopped. Only the cold rain continued its tireless assault on the windows, making a suffocating sound. Carter's gaze lingered on her back for a long time. Finally, the doors closed heavily in his face. Get the trending topics down. Is the entire PR department dead? Inside the CEO's office of Sterling Enterprises, Carter slammed a tablet onto the solid wood desk. The screen instantly shattered into a spiderweb, the reflection mirroring his bloodshot eyes. Jenkins stood 3 paces back, cold sweat dripping from his chin onto the carpet. Mr. Sterling, we cannot pull it down. Jenkins' voice trembled. Right before the market opened this morning, dozens of major national media outlets simultaneously received an anonymous ledger. It details exactly how the Bennett family's medical foundation has been laundering money and embezzling charity funds for the past 3 years. The FBI is involved. The Bennett estate was raided half an hour ago. Chloe's parents were detained at JFK Airport trying to leave the country. Carter's chest heaved violently. That is not all. Jenkins swallowed hard, braving the storm. Attached to the ledger the media published was a bank statement showing your offshore accounts paying exorbitant medical fees for Chloe Bennett. Now the entire internet is condemning Sterling, calling us accomplices in the Bennett's corruption. Sterling's stock opened limit down. Market cap dropped by $40 billion in one morning. Carter leaned heavily on the desk, his knuckles bone white. She had made her move. He knew Stella did this. The woman he once treated like a fragile accessory had not only severed his European supply chain, but had also dug up every dirty secret of the Bennett family, striking a lethal blow, precisely when Sterling was at its weakest. The heavy double doors of the office were shoved open. Several white-haired board members stormed in. Leading them was Carter's uncle, Richard Sterling. How much further are you going to let this go? Richard slammed his cane onto the floor. For some woman on the side, you publicly humiliate your legal wife, and now you have caused this massive disaster. The International Court of Arbitration in Paris opens the Lion Factory breach of contract case tomorrow morning. If we lose, all of Sterling's assets in Europe will be frozen. The entire Sir Sterling family will burn with you. Carter said nothing, his jaw was clenched tight. I already contacted Arthur Monroe. Richard stepped forward, his face cold. The Monroes are terrified of being implicated and agreed to mediate. You are going to fly to Paris right now and bring Stella back. As long as she issues a statement saying this is a marital dispute and drops the arbitration, Sterling can be saved. She will not see you. Carter's voice was raspy, like swallowing sand. That is not up to her. Richard scoffed. She married into the Sterling family. What good does bankrupting us do for her? Get the legal team, draft a transfer for 20% of corporate equity. Give her some real power to plate her. Carter closed his eyes. He knew 20% would not satisfy the Stella of today. Just days ago in Paris, she shredded it without a second glance. But this was Sterling's last chance and his last chance. Jenkins. Carter opened his eyes, a dead gray resolve in them. Tell legal to change the numbers. Transfer all my personal shares in Sterling, all my offshore trusts, and all my domestic real estate. Transfer everything into Stella's name. Richard's eyes widened in shock. Are you insane? That is $20 billion in assets. You are giving up your entire hand. How will you ever have a footing in the Sterling family again? Do as I say. Carter grabbed his suit jacket from his chair and strode out the door. Prep the jet for Paris. The next morning, the International Court of Arbitration, Paris, inside Mediation Room 1. It was pin-drop quiet. The massive crystal chandelier cast a cold white light over the 30-foot mahogany table. Stella wore a minimalist white silk blouse under a structured black blazer. She sat on one side of the table, holding a cup of warm black coffee. Her face was pale, but her spine was perfectly straight. Her eyes focused clearly on the documents in front of her. Sitting beside her were 3 top-tier French international lawyers in black robes and Valerie executing her trust. At the head of the table sat 3 stern international arbitrators. Urgent footsteps approached. The walnut doors were pushed open by court bailiffs. Carter walked in. His gait was stiff. His dark gray suit was still sharp, but the heavy dark circles under his eyes and the tight line of his mouth made him look like a bowstring about to snap. Behind him were Richard Sterling, 2 board members, an army of lawyers, and Arthur Monroe, clearly flown in overnight to apply pressure. Stella watched her father walk in. The fingers holding her coffee cup did not tremble once. She simply looked away calmly, returning her gaze to the documents. Your Honors. Sterling's lead counsel stepped forward. Prior to the formal hearing, my client wishes to initiate one final out-of-court settlement negotiation. The chief arbitrator nodded and looked at Stella. Madam Sia, do you accept the negotiation? Stella put down her coffee cup with a soft clink. Yes, give them 5 minutes. The Sterling delegation sat on the opposite side of the table. Arthur Monroe looked at his daughter frowning and spoke first. Stella, you have caused enough of a scene. Carter knows he was wrong. The Bennets have learned their lesson. How is a woman alone going to survive abroad? Drop the arbitration today in front of your elders and go home with Carter. Have some respect for both families. Stella did not look up. She turned a page of her file. Mr. Monroe, business is business. If you are here to discuss family matters, the exit is to your left. This is an international arbitration court. Arthur's face turned livid. He slammed his hand on the table. How dare you, Arthur? Calm down. Richard stopped him and turned to Stella, softening his tone. Stella, we are all family. Carter was a bastard and I have reprimanded him. Sterling Enterprises affects the livelihoods of tens of thousands of people. You are a smart girl. You should not engage in mutually assured destruction. Name your terms, whatever you want. Stella finally looked up. Her gaze bypassed Arthur and Richard, landing directly on Carter's face. Carter had been staring at her since he walked in. Watching her calm, graceful, untouchable demeanor, the bottomless black hole in his chest viciously tore at his insides. He stood up. Under everyone's shocked gazes, Carter walked around the massive mahogany table, step by step until he stood right in front of Stella. The bailiff stepped forward, but Stella raised a hand to wave them off. Carter stopped a half step away. He looked down at her. Stella, his voice was wrecked, trembling violently. He pulled a thick document from his inner pocket. The cover read in gold foil French, "Irrevocable Asset Transfer Agreement." The next second, Carter's knees bent, and he dropped straight down onto the dark red carpet, kneeling right in front of Stella. Gasps echoed through the mediation room. Richard jolted to his feet, his cane clattering to the floor. "Carter, what are you doing? You represent the Sterling family." Arthur Monroe was stunned into silence. A billionaire CEO, a ruthless corporate tyrant, was kneeling before a woman in an international court in front of lawyers and elders, completely abandoning his dignity. Carter was deaf to the room. He held the document up to Stella with both hands, his eyes so red they looked like they would bleed. "Stella, this is $20 billion. All my shares in Sterling, all my assets here and abroad." His vocal cords grated. "I brought it all. Just sign, and it is all yours." His ring was ragged, laced with desperate begging. "The shares, the title of Mrs. Sterling, it is all yours." Carter looked up at her, gripping the folder so tight, his knuckles were white. "You have punished me enough. Come home with me." The room was dead silent, save for Carter's heavy breathing. Everyone looked at Stella. The temptation of $20 billion, plus the absolute surrender of a powerful man. To anyone, this was the ultimate victorious end to a revenge plot. Stella lowered her eyelashes. Her gaze rested on Carter's pale, pathetic face for 2 seconds. Then she looked at the asset transfer agreement. She did not reach for it. November 4th, 2 years ago. Stella spoke suddenly. Her voice was incredibly clear in the quiet room, her pace steady, devoid of any emotional fluctuation. Carter's hands stiffened, his eyelid twitched violently. "You met with an offshore trust manager from the Cayman Islands at the Peninsula Hotel in New York." Stella looked at him like she was reading a financial report that had nothing to do with her. "You told me you were at an Asian financial forum." Carter's pupils shrank to pinpricks, his breath stopped entirely. Half a month later, 6 major real estate projects under Sterling declared paper losses. Immediately after, $1 billion was routed through a complex web of shell companies into that Cayman account. Stella pulled open the drawer next to her and took out a dark gray file folder. Carter's lips moved, but no sound came out. Cold sweat rolled down his temples. "You used my joint signature authority on Sterling's offshore accounts to log that $1 billion as bad debt from my personal failed investments, using it to cover up massive corporate tax evasion." Stella unwound the string on the folder. "If the IRS audited, I would be the primary liable party." No. Carter's Adam's apple bobbed. "Stella, that was just standard corporate tax avoidance. I never meant to hurt you. You just thought I would never read the English appendices. You thought I would forever be the idiot waiting for you at home." Stella cut him off. She pulled a thick stack of papers from the folder and slammed them directly into Carter's face. The sharp edge of the papers sliced his cheek, leaving a thin line of blood. Dozens of pages of stamped bank statements and whistleblower evidence scattered across the carpet, horrifyingly thorough. "This is a whistleblower report for $1 billion in tax fraud, complete with a chain of evidence for illegally transferring marital assets." Stella looked at him coldly. At 8 a.m. this morning, the originals were placed on the desks of the IRS and the FBI. Across the table, Richard's legs gave out and he collapsed back into his chair, his face paper white. $1 billion in tax fraud. That was a death sentence that would delist Sterling and send its core executives to federal prison. Kneeling on the floor, looking at the scattered evidence, Carter looked like his soul had been sucked out. His fingers spasmed uncontrollably. Stella placed the last 2 thin sheets of paper from the folder gently on top of the $20 billion asset agreement. It was a divorce agreement. "I do not need your $20 billion of garbage." Stella looked at the man kneeling at her feet, her eyes devoid of temperature. "Take your shares and spend them slowly in federal prison." She picked up her fountain pen and tossed it onto the carpet in front of Carter. It rolled twice and stopped by his white fingers. "Sign it." She spat out the last few words, every syllable like an ice-covered blade. and then get out of my sight." Carter's hands pressed against the carpet. He stared at the divorce agreement. The voices, the light, everything seemed to be sucked out of his world. The empire he was so proud of, the control he fought so hard to maintain, the dignity he abandoned today, it was all ground to dust before these few pages. He tried to look up at Stella one last time, but found he did not even have the strength to lift his head. A tearing agony ripped through his chest. It was the despair of truly losing everything, of having every escape route severed. After 2 minutes of dead silence, Carter's trembling fingers slowly reached for the pen. The pen hovered over the signature line. His hand shook violently. The custom pen he had used to sign countless billion-dollar contracts now weighed like a branding iron. The room was silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on his bent spine. He swallowed hard. His gaze moved off the bold divorce agreement lettering, trying to see Stella's face. Stella sat across from him, looking down at her phone, scrolling through an email in French. "If I sign, will you really drop the arbitration?" Carter's voice was dry, holding on to a microscopic sliver of hope. Stella did not look up. "You do not have the right to ask questions." Carter closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed the nib heavily onto the paper. The signature was twisted and messy. As he finished the final stroke, the nib tore the paper. He let go. The pen rolled away. "I signed it." Carter looked up. "Stella, I have nothing left. Now, can we?" Before he could finish, Valerie walked over and snatched the agreement away. Stella locked her phone, stood up, put it in her pocket, gave Valerie an instruction, and picked up her blazer from the chair. Just then, the heavy walnut doors were violently shoved open from the outside. 4 French financial police officers strode in, guns holstered, holding a warrant, followed by 2 Interpol agents. Mr. Carter Sterling, the lead French officer, showed his badge. "We have received verifiable intelligence and evidence regarding your involvement in transnational money laundering, massive tax evasion, and illegal asset transfers. You are under arrest." Richard jumped up from his chair, his legs failing him, and crashed to the floor. "My pills!" He clutched his chest, turning purple. The Sterling legal team fell into chaos. The police glared them down. Carter knelt on the floor, his brain short-circuiting. 2 officers stepped forward, grabbed him by the shoulders, and hauled him up. Cold metal handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. Carter did not resist. His gaze cut through the chaos, locking onto Stella, who was already at the door. "You lied to me." Carter's voice trembled, his eyes bleeding red. "You took the agreement, but you never planned to let me go." Stella stopped. She turned and looked at him. "That agreement was the ticket you bought to stand here and make me listen to your garbage for 5 minutes. She adjusted her cuff. "As for the police, they are here to close the net. I simply chose not to stop them." "Stella." Carter struggled wildly, the cuffs cutting into his flesh. "I am your husband. If I go to federal prison, the Sterling family will not let you get away with this. They will retaliate." Stella watched his panicked, twisted face. Sterling headquarters in Manhattan was raided by the feds 10 minutes ago. Her pace was unhurried. "Your uncle, your board, their assets are frozen. They do not even have the money to hire lawyers right now. No one is coming to retaliate against me." She turned, pushed open the doors, and said, "Take him away." The doors slowly closed on Carter's despairing roar. 6 months later, Lante Prison, Paris. Thick bulletproof acrylic divided the visiting room. On this side, Stella sat quietly in a stainless steel chair, wearing a beige trench coat. On the other side, the metal door opened. Carter, wearing a gray jumpsuit and heavy shackles, was led out by guards. His hair was shaved short, his cheeks were deeply sunken, his cheekbones jutting out. The once untouchable billionaire was now just a hollowed-out husk. He sat at the glass, his trembling hands picking up the black receiver. Stella picked up hers. "You finally came to see me." Carter stared at the woman across the glass, his voice rasping like a broken bellows. 3 months. The guard said, "If I did not sign this offshore asset liquidation form, you would keep sending court summons every month. You hate the hassle, so you came." Stella looked at his cracked lips. "The chief executive of the liquidation team is my partner. If I did not come, he has 30 legal avenues to forcefully seize your assets. Carter's eye twitched. His knuckles turned white on the receiver. Then why did you come? His breathing quickened, pressing his body against the glass. Stella, I know you hate me, but the fact that you are sitting here today proves you still care. For 6 months, I have thought about our 3 years together every single day. You were afraid of the dark. Every night, you left a light on in the hallway waiting for me. You had a bad stomach, but to accompany me to Gallus, I left the light on in the hallway so the hidden camera would have enough light to record. Stella's voice was completely flat. Carter's words choked off. To record the entire process of you bringing Closey's lawyers into the study at midnight to transfer marital assets. Carter stared, his mouth hanging open. As for accompanying you to Gallus, Stella looked at his twisted, shocked face. At those parties, I obtained the private contact information of the heirs to 3 major European conglomerates. 3 months ago, they became the Series A investors for the CIA brand. Only Carter's heavy, ragged breathing came through the receiver. His proudest memories of his deeply devoted wife were casually shredded into confetti by Stella. Sign the papers. Stella pressed an authorization form against the glass. Carter stared at the document and suddenly began to laugh. He laughed until tears streamed down his face. He picked up the pen and signed his name on the document the guard handed him. 2 years later, Family Court Mediation Room, Paris. Carter wore a faded washed-out suit. Due to his cooperation with the transnational financial investigation and the surrender of all hidden assets, his sentence was reduced and he was released a month ago. Penniless and restricted from luxury spending, he rented a basement in the 13th arrondissement. His hands tightly gripped a crumpled tabloid magazine. The cover featured paparazzi photos. Sia, wearing a couture suit, was holding hands with a 2-year-old girl walking out of a private preschool in Paris. The little girl had half-Asian features, big eyes, and a sweet smile. Carter's hands shook violently with excitement. The door opened and Stella walked in. She wore light makeup and looked radiant, exuding a flawless, untethered confidence. She did not look at Carter, sitting down directly across from him. Your Honor. Carter stood up abruptly, eagerly slamming the magazine onto the table, speaking in broken French. This is the proof. When she left me 2 years ago, she was pregnant. This child is 2 and 2 years old. The timeline is a perfect match. This is my daughter. I have visitation rights. I demand an immediate DNA test. He turned, his eyes shining as he stared at Stella. Stella, you did not abort it. Carter's voice held a near manic ecstasy. You lied to me. You had our baby. I do not want anything else anymore. I just want to see her once a month. I am her biological father. The law will support me. Stella opened her Hermes bag. She pulled out a thin, transparent folder and slid a hospital document with a red stamp across the table to Carter. Carter looked down. Pathology report sample. Miscarried embryonic tissue. Date, November 17th, 2 years ago. The exact night of the charity gala. The ecstasy froze on Carter's face. He stared at those lines, his mind going blank. That night, I lay on the operating table alone. No general anesthesia. Stella looked at him, her voice ice cold. I watched with my own eyes as the doctor cleaned the thing you left in my body out completely. Carter's knees gave way and he crashed heavily into the chair. Then that child. He pointed at the magazine, his fingers shaking like leaves. Stella pulled out a second document, International Adoption Certificate. Name, Mia, birthplace, Lyon, biological father, French citizen. Mia is an orphan I legally adopted a year ago. Stella looked lovely at Carter. My name is the only one on her registry. She does not have a single drop of Sterling blood in her, and she will never know that a man named Carter Sterling exists in this world. Carter stared at the adoption papers. The very last shred of hope in his heart, the only thought that had kept him alive in that basement for the past few months, was ground into ash by Stella right in front of the judge. Ash that even the wind could not scatter. No. Carter gripped his head with both hands, letting out a trapped beast's whimper. Why? Why would you rather adopt a stranger's child? Because I needed a family. Stella picked up her bag and stood, and you do not even deserve to be a stranger. She did not look at Carter again. Her lawyer pushed a court-issued restraining order in front of him. Mr. Sterling, please sign. Effective today, you are permanently stripped of any right to visit Miss Monroe or her adopted daughter in any capacity. You are forbidden from coming within 500 yards of them. Otherwise, the police will arrest you immediately. Carter looked at the restraining order. Tears hit the paper. Gripping the pen in absolute despair, he signed his name. The early autumn sun shone warmly over Paris. At an outdoor cafe along the Seine, Stella sat at a white wrought iron table. A thick stack of international jewelry arbitration files sat on the table next to a fresh latte. A breeze turned the pages gently. "Mommy," a crisp, sweet voice called out. Stella closed the file and looked up. A little girl in overalls ran over clumsily, holding up a golden autumn leaf she had just found. Stella smiled, stood up, opened her arms, and scooped her daughter into her embrace. She kissed the girl's cheek, her eyes filled with untethered freedom and confidence. The sunlight danced in her hair, outlining her in a blindingly brilliant glow, and in the shadows across the street stood the once untouchable billionaire Carter. Wearing a tattered coat, he stood next to a trash can. The restraining order nailed him strictly 500 wide away. He watched Stella in the sunlight. He watched the genuine radiant smile on her face, a smile he had never once seen during their marriage. Carter's chest heaved violently, a breath caught in his throat, forcing tears to the rims of his eyes. He slowly squatted down, burying his face hard into his hands, his shoulders shaking violently in the autumn wind. He could only watch like a nameless stalker, suffocating in endless regret and a complete dead end, looking from afar at the beautiful world he had personally destroyed.